Dr. Zeus, or AP, adjusted his ocular implants, his three eyes blinking in rapid succession as he tried to process the impossible scene unfolding before him. The Galactic Medical Conference had seen its fair share of oddities over the millennia, but this was something else entirely. "I must be hallucinating," he muttered to his colleague. Dr. Quirky, a gelatinous mass of neural tissue floating in a containment suit. "Perhaps I ingested some of that fermented Centaurian slime mold at the reception last night." Dr. Quirky's external speakers emitted a series of bubbling sounds that passed for laughter in their species. "If you're hallucinating, my dear Zeexnor, then we're sharing the same delusion. And I assure you, I haven't touched a drop of slime mold in cycles." Trios, the cause of their shared bewilderment, lay on the operating table at the center of the conference hall. A human, a species still relatively new to the galactic community, was calmly reading what appeared to be an ancient data storage device made of processed plant matter. The human called it a book, though most of the assembled alien doctors thought it looked like a fire hazard. But it wasn't the human's choice of entertainment that had the galaxy's finest medical minds in an uproar. No, it was the fact that where the human's left arm should have been, there was now a rapidly growing mass of tissue, bone, and blood vessels. "Greetings, esteemed colleagues." The booming voice of Dr. Glopnex, the conference organizer, echoed through the hall. The Thorian's tentacles waved excitedly as he addressed the crowd. "So that you are witnessing is not an illusion, not a trick of the light, and certainly not the result of consuming questionable slime molds." He paused, allowing for a ripple of nervous laughter to pass through the audience. "This, my friends, is the astounding regenerative capability of the human species. Allow me to introduce our guest, Dr. Sarah Chen of Earth." The human on the table looked up from her book and gave a little wave with her intact right arm. "Hi there, don't mind me. Just catching up on some light reading while I grow back an arm. You know how it is." A cacophony of gasps, clicks, whistles, and one very loud belch, courtesy of the gaseous entity delegation, filled the air. Dr. Zeeson found his voice first. "But this is impossible. Limb regeneration on this scale is unheard of outside of certain reptilian species and aquatic life forms." Sarah grinned, setting her book aside. "Well, technically, humans couldn't do this until about 50 years ago. We've made some improvements to our biology." "Improvements?" Dr. Querty bubbled incredulously. "You call completely rewriting the laws of genetics and cellular biology improvements? That's like saying the invention of faster-than-light travel was a minor upgrade to the horse-drawn carriage." Sarah shrugged, which looked rather odd with only one shoulder. "We like to undersell things. It's a human trait, along with sarcasm, an unhealthy obsession with caffeinated beverages, and apparently the ability to regrow limbs." Dr. Glopnex cleared his throat, or whatever passed for a throat in Thorian anatomy. "Perhaps, Dr. Chen, you could explain to our colleagues how this miraculous feat is accomplished." "Sure thing," Sarah said, sitting up a bit straighter. "But fair warning, I'm going to dumb it down a bit. Not because I think you're all idiots or anything, but because explaining the intricacies of human genetic engineering while I'm literally regrowing an arm is a bit like trying to explain quantum physics while riding a unicycle on fire in a hurricane." The assembled doctors leaned in, their various sensory organs straining to catch every word. "So about 50 years ago, humanity had a bit of an oops moment. We may or may not have accidentally unleashed a genetically engineered supervirus that threatened to wipe out all life on Earth." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. "Oh, don't look so shocked," Sarah chuckled. "If I had a credit for every time a species nearly wiped itself out, I'd have, well, probably just the one credit. But it'd be a really shiny credit." Dr. Zeichsnorp's third eye twitched. "Are you saying that this incredible regenerative ability is the result of a planet-wide pandemic?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Bingo. Give the three-eyed wonder a prize. You see, in our mad scramble to save ourselves, we stumbled upon something incredible. We call it the Phoenix Protocol." "The what now?" Dr. Querty burbled. "The Phoenix Protocol," Sarah repeated, gesturing dramatically with her good arm. "Named after a mythical bird that rises from its own ashes. Basically, we figured out how to make our cells do the same thing." As if on cue, the stump of Sarah's left arm pulsed with an eerie, bioluminescent glow. The assembled doctors watched in fascinated horror as muscle fibers knit themselves together before their very eyes. "CC." Sarah continued, seemingly oblivious to the mind-bending, biological miracle. occurring mere inches from her face. The Phoenix Protocol rewrote our genetic code from the ground up. It gave our cells the ability to store perfect copies of our DNA, kind of like biological backup drives. Dr. Glupnax's tentacles curled in excitement. Fascinating. But how does this relate to limb regeneration? Sarah grinned. I'm glad you asked. You see, when we suffer a major injury, like, oh, I don't know, having your arm bitten off by an overly enthusiastic Jovian space whale. I'm sorry, Dr. Zeichsnorp interrupted, all three of his eyes wide with disbelief. Did you say a Jovian space whale bit off your arm? Oh yeah, Sarah nodded casually. Nasty buggers, all teeth and no manners. Anyway, where was I? Oh right, major injuries. So when something like that happens, our bodies trigger the Phoenix Protocol. It's like hitting a big red resets button on the cellular level. As if to illustrate her point, Sarah's partially formed arm suddenly sprouted a network of blood vessels, spreading like a web across the developing muscle tissue. It's a damaged area. Is flooded with specially engineered stem cells. She explained, pointing to her growing limb. These little miracle workers read the backup DNA and start rebuilding, following the original blueprint down to the last detail. Dr. QWERTY's gelatinous form rippled with excitement. Incredible, but surely the energy requirements for such a process must be enormous. Sarah nodded, her expression turning slightly sheepish. Yeah, about that, there is a bit of a downside. The process burns calories like you wouldn't believe. I'm going to be absolutely ravenous when this is done. I hope you guys have a good cafeteria here. As if on cue, Sarah's stomach let out a growl that would have put a Crather War beast to shame. Several of the more high-strung delegates instinctively activated their personal force fields. Don't worry, Sarah laughed, patting her belly with her good hand. I'm not going to eat any of you. Although, she paused, eyeing Dr. QWERTY speculatively. You do look a bit like a giant bowl of jello. Are you sure you're not dessert? Dr. QWERTY's form quivered in what might have been indignation or amusement. It was hard to tell with gelatinous beings. I assure you, Dr. Chen, I am not edible. At least not to carbon-based life forms such as yourself, Sarah winked. Fair enough. I'll stick to raiding your snack machines later. Now, where was I? Oh right, the miracles of human biology. As she spoke, the bones of her new arm began to take shape, knitting together from seemingly thin air. The assembled doctors watched in awe as a perfectly formed skeletal hand materialized before their eyes. You know, Sarah mused, flexing her new bony fingers experimentally. I've always wondered what I'd look like as a skeleton. Turns out, pretty darn spooky. She waggled her skeletal digits at the audience, eliciting a mix of nervous laughter and startled yelps. Dr. Zeichsnorp, who had been furiously taking notes, looked up with a puzzled expression. But Dr. Chen, surely such an ability would have far-reaching implications beyond mere limb regeneration. Have you considered the potential for extending lifespans or curing degenerative diseases? Sarah's expression sobered slightly. Oh, we've considered it all right. In fact, that was one of the first things we looked into after we got the whole not dying from a supervirus thing sorted out. She paused, watching as layers of muscle began to form over the bones of her new arm. The thing is, extending lifespans turned out to be a bit trickier than we anticipated. Sure, we can regrow limbs and organs, but the brain, that's a whole different ballgame. How so? Dr. Glopnax inquired, his tentacles curling with curiosity. Sarah sighed, absent-mindedly drumming her fingers on the operating table. The sound of bone on metal created an eerie rhythm that sent shivers through several of the more sensitive delegates. The human brain is, well, it's a bit of a drama queen, to be honest. It doesn't like change. We found out the hard way that, while we could theoretically keep a human body alive indefinitely, the mind doesn't always want to come along for the ride. A hush fell over the conference hall as the implications of her words sank in. Are you saying, Dr. QWERTY bubbled softly, that immortality drove your people mad? Sarah grimaced. Not exactly. More like it gave us existential vertigo. Imagine living for centuries, watching the world change around you while you stay the same. It's not for everyone. We had a few, shall we say, incidents before we realized we needed to pump the brakes on the whole immortality thing. Incidents? Dr. Zeichsnorp asked, his third eye narrowing suspiciously. So let's just say that some people took the whole "you only live once" philosophy a bit too literally when they found out they could live more than once, Sarah said with a wry smile. Turns out, bungee jumping without a cord is a lot less fun when you survive the landing. Who knew? A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the audience. But surely, Dr. Glopnax interjected, the benefits of such regenerative capabilities outweigh the potential drawbacks? Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. Oh, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, the Phoenix Protocol has been a game changer for humanity. We've practically eliminated death by old age, cured countless diseases, and made interstellar travel a whole lot safer. Cosmic radiation is a lot less scary when you can regrow melted organs. Let me tell you. As if to emphasize her point, the muscle tissue on her new arm began to pulse and twitch, individual fibers knitting together in a hypnotic dance of biology. But, she continued, her tone growing more serious, it's also forced us to confront some pretty heavy philosophical questions. What does it mean to be human when you can cheat death? How do you find purpose in a life that could potentially last for centuries? Heavy stuff for a species that, not too long ago, thought the height of culinary achievement was stuffing cheese into the crust of a pizza. The mention of pizza caused a stir among some of the more culinarily adventurous delegates. Dr. Zeke Snorpy made a mental note to research this cheese-stuffed crust later. So how have you dealt with these existential issues? Dr. Quirky asked, their gelatinous form rippling with curiosity. Sarah chuckled, the sound tinge with a hint of irony. Well, in true human fashion, we've dealt with it the only way we know how, with a healthy mix of humor, stubbornness, and an absolutely ridiculous amount of paperwork. She flexed her new arm, watching as the first layers of skin began to form over the muscle tissue. For starters, we implemented what we call their boot clauses in our medical guidelines. Basically, every human has the right to decide how many times they want to reset their biological clock. Some choose to live out a natural lifespan and then call it quits. Others opt for a few extra rounds on the cosmic merry-go-round. Fascinating, Dr. Glopnax murmured, his tentacles waving in what might have been excitement or indigestion. And how do you manage the societal implications of such longevity? Sarah grinned, a mischievous glint in her eye. Oh, you're going to love this. We came up with something we call the generational shuffle. Every 50 years or so, those who've opted for extended lifespans are required to pick up and move to a different part of the world, or different planet, now that we're out here mingling with you fine folks. But why? Dr. Zayek Snorp asked, his third eye blinking rapidly in confusion. To keep things interesting. Sarah exclaimed, gesturing expansively with both arms, the new one now almost fully formed. Can you imagine being stuck in the same job, same town, same social circles for centuries? Talk about a recipe for cosmic boredom. The generational shuffle forces us to adapt, to learn new things, to see the universe from different perspectives. She paused, a wistful expression crossing her face. Plus, it helps mitigate the whole watching everyone you love grow old and die thing. Bit of a downer that the assembled doctors exchanged glances, a mix of awe and bewilderment rippling through the crowd. But surely, Dr. Quirky bubbled, their gelatinous form quivering with what might have been excitement. Such drastic societal changes must have met with resistance. Sarah threw her head back and laughed, the sound echoing through the conference hall. Oh, you have no idea. You should have seen the protests when we first introduced the shuffle. People waving signs that said things like, you can take my immortality, but you'll never take my favorite coffee shop. An eternal life, yes. Eternal DMV visits, no. She shook her head, grinning at the memory. But you know what? Humans are nothing, if not adaptable. We grumbled, we complained, we made a truly astronomical number of memes about it. But in the end, we embraced it. Turns out, the promise of new adventures every half-century is a pretty good motivator. As she spoke, the final layers of skin formed over her new arm, completing the regeneration process. Sarah held up both arms, wiggling her fingers experimentally. Ta-da, she exclaimed, beaming at the awestruck audience. Good as new. Well, better than new, actually. This arm's never even heard of carpal tunnel syndrome. Dr. Glupnax cleared his throat or whatever passed for a throat in Thorian anatomy. Dr. Chen, this is truly remarkable, but I must ask, what are the limits of this regenerative ability? Surely there must be some injuries that are beyond even the Phoenix Protocol's capabilities. Sarah's expression turned thoughtful as she hopped off the operating table, stretching her new arm. Well, you're not wrong. The Phoenix Protocol is incredible, but it's not magic. There are limits. She began pacing back and forth in front of the assembled doctors, her new arm swinging naturally at her side, as if it had always been there. For one thing, the brain is still our Achilles heel. While we can regrow neural tissue to some extent, severe brain damage is still a big no-no. Lose too much of your gray matter. And the Phoenix Protocol doesn't have enough information to work with. It's like trying to restore a corrupted hard drive with only half the backup files. Dr. Zixnorp's third eye widened in understanding. So the consciousness, the essence of the individual, must remain intact for the regeneration to be successful. Bingo! Sarah snapped her fingers, pointing at the three-eyed alien with a grin. Give the doc a gold star, or whatever the galactic equivalent is. A platinum nebula, perhaps? She continued her pacing, warming to her subject. The other big limitation is energy. Regrowing a limb like this. She waved her newly regenerated arm for emphasis. Burns through calories like you wouldn't believe. It's like running a marathon while simultaneously solving differential equations and building a scale model of the Taj Mahal out of toothpicks. Dr. Quirky's gelatinous form rippled with what might have been laughter. An interesting analogy, Dr. Chen. But surely the caloric requirements can be met through standard nutritional supplementation. Sarah's eyes lit up with a mischievous gleam. Oh, my gelatinous friend, you clearly haven't experienced the joy of a post-regeneration feeding frenzy. Let's just say that all-you-can-eat buffets across Earth had to rewrite their policies after the Phoenix Protocol went public. There's nothing quite like watching a little old lady who just regrew a kidney demolish her own weight in sushi. A wave of amused burbles, clicks, and whistles rippled through the audience. But in all seriousness, Sarah continued, her tone sobering slightly, the energy requirements are no joke. In emergency situations, when someone's suffered massive trauma, we have to hook them up to specialized nutrient IVs just to keep the regeneration process from burning through their body's reserves. It's a delicate balance. Dr. Glupnax's tentacles waved thoughtfully. Fascinating. And what of the psychological impact? Surely, experiencing such dramatic physical reconstruction must take a toll on the mind. Sarah's expression turned wry. Oh, you have no idea. We quickly learned that the brain doesn't always keep up with the body's rapid changes. Ever had an itch on a limb that isn't there anymore? Now imagine that itch suddenly being back, along with an entire new arm. It's enough to drive you bonkers. She tapped her temple with her index finger. We had to develop entirely new branches of psychology just to deal with the mental whiplash of rapid regeneration. We call it quantum identity therapy. Helps people reconcile their mental self-image with their ever-changing physical reality. Dr. Zixnorp leaned forward, all three eyes blinking rapidly in fascination. And how does this therapy work? Exactly, Sarah grinned. Well, it involves a lot of meditation, virtual reality simulations, and in some cases, a healthy dose of what we humans like to call hair of the dog. Seeing the confused looks on the alien faces, or what pass for faces among the assembled species. She elaborated. Basically, we found that sometimes the best way to get over the weirdness of regeneration is to lean into it. So we set up regeneration gyms where people can go to voluntarily experience controlled limb loss and regrowth. It's like exposure therapy, but with more tentacles. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by a cacophony of excited chatter in a dozen different alien languages. You mean to tell us, Dr. Quirky bubbled incredulously, that humans willingly dismember themselves for? Sarah shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eye. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds a bit bonkers. But hey, we're the species that invented bungee jumping and competitive eating. Voluntary dismemberment was really the next logical step. She paused, noting the mix of horror and fascination on the alien faces around her. Oh, come on. Don't tell me your species never did anything crazy in the name of science or thrills. No recreational molecule disassembly. No quantum consciousness swapping parties. The silence that greeted her was answer enough. Right, Sarah said, clapping her hands together. Well, moving on, let's talk about some of the more practical applications of the Phoenix Protocol, shall we? Because believe it or not, regrowing limbs is just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Glopnax's tentacles perked up with interest. Oh, do tell, Dr. Chen. What other miracles has this protocol enabled? Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement. Oh, where to begin? Well, for starters, it's revolutionized our approach to space exploration. You know how cosmic radiation used to be a big problem for long-term space travel? Not anymore. Now our astronauts can just regrow any cells damaged by radiation exposure. She began ticking off points on her fingers. So, we've also made huge strides in organ transplantation. Need a new heart? No problem. We'll just grow you one using your own cells. Liver decided to call it quits after one too many nights out. Give it a couple of weeks, and you'll have a brand new one, no donor needed. Dr. Zeichsnorp's third eye twitched in disbelief. But surely there must be drawbacks. Side effects. Unforeseen consequences. Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. Well, you're not wrong. Like any major technological leap, the Phoenix Protocol has had its share of, let's call them interesting side effects. She began pacing again, her newly regrown arm swinging naturally at her side. For one thing, it's played absolute havoc with our forensic science. Do you have any idea how hard it is to solve a murder when the victim can potentially regrow and walk away from the crime scene? A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the audience. I'm serious, Sarah exclaimed, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. Guys, we had to completely overhaul our legal system to account for temporary death. And don't even get me started on the insurance industry. Try explaining to your claims adjuster why you need coverage for repetitive limb loss due to recreational activities. Dr. Quirky's gelatinous form rippled with what might have been laughter. It seems that your solution to one problem has created a host of new ones. Sarah nodded, grinning. Welcome to the human experience, my friend. Solving problems by creating new, more interesting problems is kind of our specialty. But hey, at least it keeps life interesting, right? She paused, her expression growing more serious. But you know what the biggest challenge has been? Learning to value life when death isn't necessarily the end anymore. A hush fell over the conference hall as the weight of her words sank in. Sarah continued, her voice soft but carrying easily in the silence. For most of our history, the finality of death gave life its meaning. It was the ultimate deadline, if you'll pardon the pun. But now we have to find new ways to give our existence purpose. Dr. Glopnax's tentacles drooped slightly. That sounds profoundly challenging. Sarah nodded, a wry smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Oh, it is. But you know what? I think it's also the most exciting thing to happen to our species since we figured out how to make fire. Because now, we're not just living, we're choosing how to live every single day. She spread her arms wide, encompassing the entire conference hall. And that's why I'm here, talking to all of you brilliant minds from across the galaxy. Because the Phoenix Protocol isn't just about cheating death or regrowing limbs. It's about redefining what it means to be human. And who knows, maybe someday it'll help us redefine what it means to be alive, period. A wave of murmurs swept through the audience, a mix of awe, excitement, and more than a little trepidation. Dr. Zeichsnor praised one of his hands, or what passed for a hand in the species. Dr. Chen, if I may ask, given all these profound changes, how has humanity's role in the galactic community been affected? Surely such abilities must have caused some concern among other species. Sarah's expression turned mischievous. Oh, you have no idea. The first time we showed up at a Galactic Council meeting and casually mentioned our new party trick, you could have heard a pin drop. And let me tell you, in a room full of species with varying gravitational preferences, that's saying something. She began to pace again, her newly regrown arm gesticulating animatedly as she spoke. At first, there was a lot of fear and suspicion. Some species thought we were planning some kind of immortal invasion. Others wanted to quarantine us, afraid we'd upset the natural order, or some such nonsense. Dr. Quirky's gelatinous form rippled with what might have been concern. And how did humanity respond to these concerns? Sarah's grin widened. In true human fashion, of course. We threw a party. Seeing the confused looks on the alien faces around her, she elaborated. She called it the Galactic Regeneration Gala, invited representatives from every spacefaring species to Earth. We had demonstrations, key CA sessions, and yes, a few voluntary dismemberment shows. Nothing says we come in peace quite like watching a human regrow a leg while sipping on a cocktail, right? A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the audience. Siren button. In all seriousness, Sarah continued, her tone sobering slightly. Understood the concerns. The Phoenix Protocol is a game changer, not just for us, but potentially for the entire galaxy. So we've been very careful about how we share this tech. Dr. Glopnax's tentacles waved curiously. Oh, you mean you're willing to share the Phoenix Protocol with other species? Sarah nodded, her expression serious. Under very controlled circumstances, yes. We've established the Interstellar Regeneration Research Institute, where scientists from all over the galaxy can come to study the protocol and its potential applications for their own species. She held up a hand, forestalling the excited murmurs that had broken out. But, and this is a big but, we're not just handing out the keys to the kingdom. The Phoenix Protocol is as much about ethics and philosophy as it is about biology. Any species wanting to adopt it has to demonstrate that they're ready for the responsibilities that come with it. Dr. Zeke Snorp's third eye narrowed skeptically. And who decides if a species is ready? Sarah's smile turned wry. Excellent question, Doc. The short answer is, it's complicated. We've set up an independent galactic ethics committee with representatives from dozens of species. They evaluate each application on a case-by-case basis. She began ticking off points on her fingers. They look at things like the species' overall technological development, their philosophical and ethical frameworks, their track record with other advanced technologies. Oh, and most importantly, their sense of humor. Seeing the confused looks on the alien faces, Sarah laughed. I'm kidding about that last part, mostly, but you'd be surprised how important a good sense of humor is when dealing with the existential implications of near immortality. Dr. Quirky's gelatinous form rippled with what might have been amusement. It seems that humanity has put a great deal of thought into the broader implications of the Phoenix Protocol. Sarah nodded, her expression turning serious once more. We had to. The ability to regrow limbs, cure diseases, potentially extend life indefinitely. It's not just a medical breakthrough. It's a fundamental shift in what it means to be a sentient being. We couldn't just stumble into that blindly. She paused, looking out over the assembled alien doctors, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and determination. But you know what? I think we're on the cusp of something amazing, not just for humanity, but for all sentient life. The Phoenix Protocol could be the key to unlocking potential we've never even dreamed of. Dr. Glopnax's tentacles waved excitedly, such as Sarah's grin widened. Well, for starters, imagine the possibilities for interspecies cooperation. With the ability to regrow and modify our bodies at will, we could potentially adapt to live on any planet, in any environment. No more need for terraforming or life support systems. We could explore the farthest reaches of the galaxy, meet new civilizations, exchange ideas. She trailed off, her eyes distant, as if seeing a future only she could envision. Then she shook her head, chuckling softly. But listen to me, getting all starry-eyed and philosophical. I'm supposed to be giving a medical presentation, not auditioning for the role of galactic visionary. A wave of laughter rippled through the audience, the tension that had been building during her serious moment dissipating. So, Sarah clapped her hands together, her newly regrown arm moving in perfect sync with its partner. Who's up for a little demonstration? I've got a fresh arm here, and I'm betting at least one of you has been dying to see how it holds up under an alien medical scan. Any takers? The conference hall erupted into a cacophony of excited chatter, tentacles waving, appendages raised, and in the case of some gaseous species, enthusiastic color changes. As Sarah began fielding questions and preparing for impromptu examinations, Dr. Zeke Snorp leaned over to Dr. Quirky, his voice low. You know, when I woke up this morning, I never imagined I'd be contemplating the philosophical implications of human limb regeneration. Dr. Quirky's gelatinous form rippled with what was unmistakably amusement. My dear Zeke Snorp, I think that's the effect humans tend to have on the galaxy. They show up, do something impossible, crack a few jokes, and suddenly we're all questioning the very nature of existence. Dr. Zeke Snorp's three eyes blinked in rapid succession. And you know what the strangest part is? I think I'm actually looking forward to seeing what they'll do next. As if on cue, Sarah's voice rang out over the excited chatter of the crowd. All right, folks, who wants to see me juggle my own fingers? Don't worry, I'll put them back when I'm done. The two alien doctors exchanged a look. A what passed for a look between a three-eyed being and a sentient gelatinous mass, then burst into laughter. It seemed that the galaxy, for better or worse, would never be quite the same now that humans had joined the interstellar community. And somehow, that didn't seem like such a bad thing after all.